Death may look like an ending, a final breath, a final silence. But what if it is not the end at all? What if death is only the moment one pattern breaks and another begins? In this video, we follow the science of life, consciousness, and the universe itself to ask a quiet but unsettling question. Is death the beginning of another reset? If this kind of journey fascinates the mind, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay for the full story. Far beyond any single life, beyond any planet, beyond the pale line of one star's light, the universe extends across distances so large that ordinary language begins to thin and lose its edge. It does not sit still, it expands. Galaxies move away from one another on the larger scales, not because they drift through empty space like dust in a quiet room, but because space itself changes with time. Observations indicate that this expansion has continued for roughly 13.8 billion years since the early hot, dense state from which the known universe develops. In that immense setting, every living thing appears late, small, and brief. A human death, measured against stars and galaxies, occupies almost no time at all. Yet the fact of its smallness does not make it unreal. It places it inside a larger order, where change is normal, endings are common, and nothing visible remains fixed forever. Light travels across this vastness, carrying news from deep time. When astronomers study distant galaxies, they do not see them as they are in the present moment. They see old light arriving after journeys of millions or billions of years. The sky therefore acts as a record of earlier states of matter. In one direction there is darkness, but not emptiness in any simple sense. Between galaxies there is thin gas, radiation, magnetic structure, and the faint gravitational pull of matter that does not shine. The universe contains ordinary matter, the kind that forms stars, planets, bodies, oceans, and stone. But it also contains dark matter, inferred from its gravitational effects and dark energy, a name given to the cause of the accelerated expansion seen in large-scale observations. Their full nature remains uncertain. What is clear is that the human story unfolds inside a cosmos that is only partly understood, and that uncertainty is itself part of the scientific picture. At the broader scale, the universe shows structure. Galaxies gather into groups and clusters. Clusters connect along vast filaments, with immense regions of lower density between them. Matter is not spread evenly like smooth mist. Gravity draws it into patterns over long durations. These patterns take shape gradually, over hundreds of millions and then billions of years, as slight differences in density grow stronger. In this way, the cosmos becomes a place of form rather than featureless spread. Even so, its order is never permanent. Stars exhaust their fuel, galaxies collide and merge, radiation streams outward and thins, heat moves from warmer regions to cooler ones. The physical world does not preserve any arrangement by sentiment or intention. It changes because the laws of nature allow change, and because time gives those changes room to unfold. Against this background, the idea of a reset begins to look less like a sudden cosmic event and more like a repeating feature of nature in astronomy. Nothing remains exactly as it is. A cloud of gas becomes stars. A star changes its inner structure as it uses nuclear fuel. A planetary surface is altered by impacts, sunlight, chemistry, wind, and water when such things are present. Even atoms that seem steady in everyday life are part of a larger history that reaches back to earlier stars and earlier states of the cosmos. A reset, in this outermost sense, does not mean a return to an untouched beginning. nature rarely returns anything to an original form. Instead, it rearranges, it breaks down one pattern and permits another. It erases some structures while preserving their materials. The past is not restored, but it is carried forward in altered form. Death, placed inside this immense frame, first appears not as an isolated mystery but as one instance of a broader rule. Every organized thing persists for a time and then loses the conditions that maintain its order. A star holds itself together through gravity and internal pressure. A galaxy maintains form through the long balance of motion and mass. A living body preserves itself through metabolism, repair, and constant exchange with its environment. When the maintaining process fails, the structure changes. This principle is visible at every scale. The difference lies in the mechanism and in the time span. A star may endure for billions of years. A human life occupies only decades. But both exist as temporary arrangements in a universe where duration is finite and transformation is ordinary. The earliest observable light in the cosmos, the cosmic microwave background, offers a quiet image of this long development. It is the cooled remnant of radiation from the young universe, released when matter and light first separate enough for photons to move freely. It now fills space as a faint background glow, detectable with instruments rather than eyes. This radiation does not tell a story of personal endings. It tells a story of beginnings governed by temperature, density, expansion, and time. Yet it also sets the stage for every later ending, because it marks a universe already committed to change. From that early state come the conditions for atoms, stars, galaxies, planets, chemistry, and eventually life. Death enters much later, after complexity has had time to arise. It is not present at the first moment as a biological event, but it becomes unavoidable once living systems appear and begin the long work of resisting disorder for a limited span. In this distant frame, life does not stand apart from the cosmos. It emerges from it. The carbon in living tissue, the oxygen in water, the calcium in bone, the iron in blood all belong to a material history older than Earth itself. The body is not made from special substance kept separate from stars. It is made from matter that has already passed through other forms. This fact does not reduce life. It locates life. It shows that living order is one expression of cosmic history. Death, then, is not matter leaving nature. It is matter remaining within nature while one living pattern comes to an end. The outer universe gives no sign that it pauses for that event. Expansion continues. Starlight crosses intergalactic space. Gravity shapes structure. Radiation cools. Time carries everything onward without interruption. This calm indifference can seem severe when viewed from within a human life, yet it also offers a kind of clarity. The cosmos does not hide that endings are built into existence. It displays them openly in every direction. New stars are born in some regions while older stars fade in others. Galaxies grow through collision and loss. Matter circulates through many forms without preserving any single arrangement forever. In that sense, the larger setting already contains the answer to whether death may be the beginning of another reset. It suggests that endings in nature are rarely absolute disappearances. They're transitions in arrangement, changes in process, and redistributions of material and energy under persistent law. What continues is not always the form that ends. Often it is only the substance, the influence, or the consequence. From this outermost horizon, death has not yet become personal. It has not yet reached the body, the brain, or memory. Here it remains a small event within an ancient, expanding cosmos. The largest truth visible at this scale is simple. The universe is dynamic, structured, and unfinished. It has been changing for billions of years before any human life begins, and it continues changing after any human life ends. In that immense continuity, every ending belongs first to a larger pattern of transformation. Across the great spread of the universe, galaxies appear as islands of light, but they are not still islands, and they are not made only of stars. A galaxy is a changing system of stars, gas, dust, magnetic fields, dark matter, and radiation, all held in long relationship by gravity. Some are spirals with broad turning arms, some are ellipticals, rounder and smoother in appearance, with older stellar populations and less cold gas. Some are irregular, shaped by disturbance, interaction, or uneven internal history. In every case, a galaxy is less like a fixed object and more like a slow process made visible. It gathers matter, reshapes it, sends some of it outward, and uses part of it again. In this region of the story, the idea of reset takes on a more concrete form. It is no longer only the transformation of the universe at large. It becomes the repeated reworking of matter inside vast stellar communities. Between the stars lies the interstellar medium, the thin mixture of gas and dust that fills a galaxy's interior spaces. Though thin by earthly standards, this material is essential. Much of it is hydrogen, with helium and smaller amounts of heavier elements. Dust grains, built from carbon-rich and silicon-rich compounds, drift through the dark lanes of galaxies and absorb or scatter starlight. This medium is not evenly spread. It forms clouds, shells, filaments, and denser molecular regions where atoms combine into molecules, especially molecular hydrogen. In these colder and denser clouds, gravity can begin to pull matter inward. Turbulence, radiation, magnetic pressure, and shock waves all influence this process. A cloud may remain stable for long spans, or it may collapse in part and produce new stars. The galaxy therefore carries within itself the materials of both age and renewal. Its dim regions are not empty pauses between bright points. They are reservoirs of future structure. Star formation is one of the clearest examples of renewal within a galaxy. A cold, dense cloud does not suddenly become a star in all places at once. It breaks into collapsing regions. In each region, matter falls inward, heats, and forms a growing young star surrounded in many cases by a disk of gas and dust. As the central temperature rises high enough, nuclear fusion begins. Hydrogen nuclei join to form helium, releasing energy. A new star then pushes outward with light and heat even as gravity continues to hold it together. Around many young stars, remaining dust and gas can gather into planets, moons, asteroids, and smaller bodies. Out of a dark cloud, a bright system emerges. Yet this is not creation from nothing. It is reorganization. The cloud itself may include matter once released by older stars. A newborn star therefore carries the remains of earlier generations inside its light and substance. Galaxies do not simply produce stars and leave them unchanged. Stars alter the galaxies that host them. Massive young stars shine intensely in ultraviolet light, heating nearby gas and driving it outward. Stellar winds, streams of particles flowing from stars, push on the surrounding medium. Later, some massive stars end in supernova explosions, sending shock waves through nearby clouds. These events can disperse gas, preventing immediate collapse in one place. while compressing it elsewhere and encouraging new star formation. A galaxy thus regulates itself through feedback, a term for processes in which the products of change influence later change. It is not a smooth or quiet cycle. Some regions flare with activity, others grow relatively calm. Spiral arms can act as sites where gas is compressed and star formation is enhanced. Galactic centers may show intense energy if material falls toward a central black hole. But even amid this variation, the general pattern remains: matter is gathered, transformed, released, and gathered again. Heavier elements deepen this cycle. In the early universe, ordinary matter consists mostly of hydrogen and helium, with only trace amounts of lithium. The carbon, oxygen, silicon, iron, calcium, and many other elements needed for rocky planets and living chemistry are formed later inside stars and through stellar death. When stars release these products into their host galaxies, they enrich the surrounding gas. Astronomers call elements heavier than helium metals, a technical term used in astrophysics. Once defined, the plain meaning is simpler. It refers to the richer chemical mix made available after earlier generations of stars live and die. Over time, a galaxy can become more chemically complex. Younger stars in some regions may form from gas that contains more of these heavier elements than the gas from which much older stars once formed. In this way, galaxies remember their past not through thought or intention, but through composition. Some galaxies undergo especially dramatic renewal when they interact or merge. Gravity distorts their shapes, pulls out long tidal streams of stars and gas, and can drive material inward toward their centers. These events may trigger bursts of star formation, sometimes called starbursts, in which stars form at unusually high rates for limited periods. Merging does not restore a prior state. It scrambles two histories into a new one. Old stellar populations continue, gas clouds collide, dust lanes shift, and the overall structure changes. The result may be a larger spiral, an elliptical galaxy, or a more complex form depending on the masses, motions, and gas content involved. Once again, the pattern is not simple repetition, it is renewal through alteration. The galaxy is reset in one sense, because old arrangements do not survive intact, but it is not reset to innocence or emptiness. It carries forward everything gravity can keep. Even galaxies themselves can lose the conditions that support certain forms of renewal. A galaxy may consume much of its cold gas or lose part of it through energetic processes. Environments within galaxy clusters can strip gas from galaxies moving through hot intergalactic plasma. Without enough cool gas, star formation slows or largely stops. The galaxy then becomes quieter, dominated by older stars that continue to age. This is not death in a biological sense, but it is decline in one kind of activity. Renewal becomes less frequent because the raw material for easy renewal is reduced. Still, the stars remain. Their light continues for immense spans, and their gravitational presence still shapes the whole. Inactive does not mean erased. The form changes, the rate changes, the visible future narrows, but the system persists in another state. Within this galactic region, death begins to look less like a final wall and more like a transfer point. A star's end can seed future stars. Dust released by old stars can become part of new clouds. Shock waves from violent endings can help shape later beginnings. The galaxy lives by using what has already passed through other forms, its apparent beauty. The glow of spiral arms and the red haze of emission nebulae depends on countless earlier transformations hidden within the gas. Nothing here is untouched. Every shining region emerges from prior change. Every dark lane holds the residue of former light and the possibility of later light. This pattern remains impersonal, but it grows more intimate than the scale of the whole universe. In galaxies, the matter that will one day form worlds and bodies is processed again and again. The concept of reset becomes less abstract. It is visible in cloud, star, wind, explosion, remnant, and cloud again. A galaxy does not grant immortality to any one object within it. It grants continuity to matter and process across enormous stretches of time. One form ends. Another begins from altered remains. The old is not preserved whole, yet it is not lost without trace. By the end of this galactic view, the broad lesson is steady. Renewal in nature is not a return to a clean beginning. It is a continuation through transformation. Galaxies shine because they keep reworking their contents. Their light is the visible sign of ongoing rearrangement. In this region, the question of whether death begins another reset finds a provisional answer. Nature shows that endings can feed later structure, but only by surrendering the form that once held them together. Within one ordinary spiral galaxy, in a modest outer arm, a single star and its surrounding bodies turn through space in a pattern that has endured for billions of years. This local arrangement is the solar system, not a separate kingdom from the wider cosmos, but a smaller structure assembled from the same ancient materials shaped by the same physical laws. At its center, the Sun contains almost all the system's mass. Its gravity governs the motions of planets, dwarf planets, moons, asteroids, comets, dust, and smaller fragments of rock and ice. The system forms about 4.6 billion years ago from a rotating cloud of gas and dust, itself already enriched by earlier generations of stars. From the beginning, it is a story of concentration and leftover matter, of a bright center and a wide field of remnants. In this region, the idea of reset narrows again. It is no longer only about galaxies reworking their contents. It becomes the quieter persistence of a local system built from older debris and still carrying the marks of its violent birth. The early cloud does not collapse into one object alone. As gravity pulls material inward, the cloud spins faster and flattens into a disk. Most of the mass gathers at the center and heats until the sun ignites through nuclear fusion. Around it, smaller clumps collide, stick, shatter, and gather again. Dust grains become pebbles, pebbles become larger bodies, and larger bodies continue to merge through repeated impacts. In the inner regions, where temperatures are higher, rocky planets take shape. Farther out, where colder conditions allow volatile compounds to remain solid, giant planets form and gather thick envelopes of gas or layers of ice and rock. This is not an orderly construction carried out in silence. It is dynamic, crowded, and destructive as well as creative. Many early bodies are broken apart. Some are absorbed into larger ones. Some are thrown outward or inward by gravitational encounters. The solar system begins as a field of collisions in which structure emerges through loss as much as through accumulation. The sun provides the dominant source of energy for the system. Its light and heat set the conditions on planetary surfaces, drive atmospheric motion where atmospheres exist, and influence the chemistry of ice, rock, and gas. Yet the sun itself is not an unchanging lamp. It is a middle-aged main-sequence star, steadily converting hydrogen into helium in its core. This process has continued for billions of years, and will continue for billions more before the sun enters later stages of stellar evolution. For now, Its output is stable enough to support long-term planetary climates under favorable local conditions. The steadiness matters in a universe where so much changes through violence or drift. The solar system depends on the sun's relative regularity. Life on Earth becomes possible, not because the cosmos suspends its laws, but because the local conditions remain within a narrow range for a very long time. Around the sun, the planets do not travel through empty stillness. Space between them contains solar wind, a flow of charged particles from the sun, along with magnetic fields and scattered dust. Comets carry ice and dust from colder regions, and sometimes sweep inward on elongated paths. Asteroids preserve fragments of early formation, many of them little changed since the system's youth. Meteorites that reach planetary surfaces provide direct evidence of these ancient materials. Some contain grains older than the solar system itself, tiny mineral remnants formed around other stars before the sun is born. In this way, the local system openly reveals its inheritance. It does not begin from a pure local origin. It is made from recycled matter, and some of that matter still survives in small solid forms that have crossed billions of years with comparatively little alteration. The architecture of the system also shows that apparent order can arise from earlier disorder. The major planets move around the sun in nearly the same plane because they form from a flattened disk. Many moons circle their planets in stable paths. Rings of ice and dust surround some giant planets. Resonances, the regular relationships between orbital periods, help preserve some patterns and destabilize others. Yet behind this order lies a record of rearrangement. The giant planets likely migrate to some degree during early history, shifting the paths of smaller bodies. Countless impacts reshape young worlds. The Moon probably forms after a massive collision between the early Earth and another body of similar scale. Much of the debris from that event gathers into orbit and later combines. Here again, the local evidence suggests that resets in nature do not erase the past. They preserve it in altered form. Even calm orbits may be the final result of earlier upheaval. The outer reaches of the solar system extend far beyond the familiar planets. Beyond Neptune lies the Kuiper Belt, a broad region of icy bodies, including dwarf planets and smaller remnants of formation. Farther still, the Oort cloud is thought to surround the solar system as a distant reservoir of cometary bodies, though it remains inferred rather than directly seen as a complete structure. These outer regions are cold, dim, and slow. They preserve matter that has changed less since the system's early era. Yet even here there is no absolute stillness. Gravitational nudges from passing stars, galactic tides, and planetary interactions can redirect objects inward. Material long stored in darkness can re-enter the inner system and become visible again as a comet brightens near the sun. The local system therefore contains both memory and movement, storage and release. For the question of death and reset, this region offers a more intimate lesson than the galaxy, but still one broader than life. The solar system shows how a stable world can arise from repeated destruction, and how long continuity depends on the survival of relationships rather than the permanence of any one event. Earth exists because dust sticks, rocks collide, heat separates materials, and gravity holds the final body together. The Moon exists because an earlier world is partly broken. Planetary surfaces bear craters that mark sudden endings. Atmospheres are gained, lost, and changed. Ice gathers, melts, sublimates, or remains locked away depending on distance, pressure, and energy. Nothing in the system is exempt from process. Stability is real, but it is dynamic stability. maintained through motion and balance rather than absolute rest. The Sun's future also places local existence within a clear timeline. It will not shine forever in its current state. In several billion years, as its internal composition changes, it will brighten and later expand into a red giant. Conditions on Earth will be profoundly altered long before the final stages of that expansion. The exact sequence for specific planetary outcomes remains under study, but the broad path is well understood. Local habitability is temporary. Even this apparently durable system contains a limit built into its central star. This does not make the present fragile in a sentimental sense. It makes it physical. Every environment depends on conditions that can persist only for a finite span. Seen from this solar perspective, a reset is not a mystical return. It is the ongoing rearrangement of inherited matter under gravity, sunlight, collision, and time. Ancient dust becomes planets, broken worlds become moons, frozen bodies return as comets, rocks preserve earlier fire. The local system is calm enough to support life and old enough to hold memory in stone, yet it never escapes the larger law that structures are temporary. What lasts is not untouched form, but process, relation, and material continuity. This region, therefore, brings the outer story closer to the ground without yet reaching the living surface. The solar system is a durable neighborhood made from prior endings. It proves that new stability can emerge from old wreckage, and that even the most familiar sky rests on a long history of transformation. In that sense, it offers another quiet answer. A reset in nature is not the start of something wholly separate from what came before. It is the old matter, under new conditions. Taking on a different order, Earth turns within the light of the sun as a rocky planet that appears stable from the distance of space. Yet almost every part of it is in motion. Its air circulates, its oceans shift and rise, its rocks crack, melt, and are lifted or drawn downward over spans far beyond a human life. Water changes state and moves between sea, sky, river, ice, soil, and living tissue. Carbon passes through air, stone, ocean, and organism. Nitrogen moves through atmosphere, soil, and cells. Even the ground underfoot, which seems to promise firmness and permanence, belongs to a restless planetary system that keeps reworking its surface and interior. In this region, the question of reset becomes planetary. Death is still not yet personal here. It is approached through the larger fact that Earth itself holds no fixed arrangement for long. It preserves continuity not by stillness, but by endless turnover. From orbit, the planet's outer appearance is shaped by water, cloud, and land. Liquid water covers most of the surface, gathering in connected oceans that redistribute heat and influence climate on global scales. The atmosphere, thin compared with the size of the planet, moderates temperature, carries moisture, and shields the surface from some harmful radiation. Continents drift slowly over the mantle beneath them through plate tectonics. The motion of rigid surface plates driven by deeper heat and convection. Volcanoes release gases from the interior. Rain and rivers wear down mountains and carry sediment toward lower ground. Glaciers grind rock and move it. Coastlines retreat or advance. No surface view is final. Every landscape represents a temporary state within longer cycles of construction and erosion. The atmosphere offers one of the clearest examples of planetary renewal. It is not a static shell but a moving mixture, mainly nitrogen and oxygen today. With smaller amounts of argon, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and trace gases. Winds arise from uneven heating by the sun, and from the turning of the planet. Warm air rises, cool air sinks, and moisture condenses into clouds before falling again as rain, snow, or ice. Storms gather energy from differences in temperature and pressure. Over longer spans, the composition of the atmosphere changes as life, oceans, rocks, and volcanic activity exchange gases. Early Earth likely has an atmosphere very different from the present one. Free oxygen becomes abundant much later, mainly through photosynthesis by microorganisms and later plants. The breathable air of the present world is therefore not an original gift of the planet in fixed form. It is a result of deep interaction between geology, chemistry, sunlight, and life. Water links almost every active system on Earth. It falls from cloud, runs across stone, sinks into soil, enters roots, moves through blood, freezes in ice sheets, and returns to the sea. Because water dissolves many substances and carries heat effectively, it acts as both transport medium and climate regulator. In the oceans, currents move warm and cold water across great distances, helping shape regional environments. In the air, water vapor influences temperature through its role as a greenhouse gas and through cloud formation. In rocks, water participates in chemical weathering, slowly altering minerals and helping produce soils. It also helps lubricate some geological processes and affects the melting behavior of material deep below the crust. The water cycle does not preserve any drop in one place forever. It continually redistributes matter and energy. In that sense, the planet already teaches that continuity often takes the form of movement rather than storage. The rocky surface follows a similar principle. Mountains rise where plates collide, yet erosion begins wearing them down almost as soon as they form. Rivers cut valleys and carry fragments toward basins and deltas. Sediments are buried, compressed, and turned into rock. Some of that rock is later lifted again, exposed, and broken down once more. Other portions are drawn deeper into Earth where heat and pressure alter them into new mineral forms. Given enough time, crustal material can even be returned to the mantle through subduction, the sinking of one plate beneath another. The rock cycle is not a neat circle with identical stages repeating in equal order. It is a set of pathways through which minerals and structures are transformed under changing conditions. What appears permanent at human scale is often only slow. Stone itself participates in reset. Earth's internal heat keeps this planetary turnover active. Part of that heat comes from the planet's formation, when impacts and gravitational compression release energy, and part comes from radioactive decay inside Earth. The interior remains layered, with a crust above a mantle of slowly moving solid rock, and a core rich in iron and nickel. The outer core is liquid, and its motion helps generate the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. This field deflects much of the solar wind and helps protect the atmosphere from gradual stripping by charged particles. Even this protective shield is dynamic. It fluctuates and has reversed polarity many times in the geological past. The planet's apparent stability thus depends on deep-moving systems hidden beneath the surface. Earth remains habitable not because it is inert, but because it is active in sustained ways. The carbon cycle shows more directly how Earth resets material without erasing history. Carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere through volcanic release, respiration, decay, and human activity. It is removed through photosynthesis, dissolution in seawater, and the long burial of carbon in sediments and rock. Some carbon becomes limestone or other carbonate minerals. Some is stored for long periods in fossil organic matter. Some returns through combustion or tectonic processes. Carbon atoms move through sky, leaf, ocean, shell, flesh, and stone. They are not loyal to one form. A carbon atom in a living body may once have been part of a marine organism, a volcanic gas, or ancient dissolved carbon in seawater. This circulation does not make individual life less distinct. It shows that individuality exists within material exchange. Living order borrows from planetary cycles and later returns to them. Nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and other essential elements follow their own pathways through air, water, rock, and life. Some require microorganisms to shift them into forms usable by plants and animals. Lightning can fix atmospheric nitrogen into chemically active compounds. Weathering releases phosphorus from rocks. Ocean sediments can lock elements away for long spans before geological activity exposes them again. Earth behaves less like a storehouse and more like a giant processing system. Slow in some regions, rapid in others, always redistributing the ingredients that make complex structures possible. Nothing on the planet's surface remains isolated from this broader circulation for long. Mass extinctions reveal another layer of planetary reset. Several times in Earth's history, environmental change has sharply reduced the diversity of life. Causes differ, including large impacts, massive volcanic episodes, climate shifts, ocean chemistry changes, and complex interactions among these forces. After such losses, ecosystems eventually recover in altered forms, often over millions of years. The recovery does not restore what was there before. Entire lineages vanish. New groups expand into emptied ecological roles. The pattern is severe but consistent with the larger logic of the planet. Earth does not hold biological forms fixed. It permits flourishing under certain conditions and widespread loss when those conditions change. Then, from what remains, other arrangements emerge. In this planetary region, death is still seen from a distance, but it is no longer abstract. The whole world operates through replacement, circulation, and the breakdown of fixed form. Air is remade through exchange. Water is remade through movement. Rock is remade through heat, pressure, and erosion. The same planet that shelters life also teaches impermanence at every scale. Its great continuity depends on countless smaller endings. Clouds dissolve. Rivers shift course. Coastlines disappear. Mountain chains rise and wear away. Species spread and vanish. Yet the planet itself continues as an open system, shaped by sunlight above and heat below. Earth therefore answers the question of reset in a grounded way. A reset here does not mean beginning again from nothing. It means that conditions change, structures fail, materials circulate, and new arrangements arise from what remains available. The planet never returns to an untouched starting point. It moves forward through transformation, carrying old matter into new forms. On such a world, death will later appear not as a violation of nature, but as one more passage within the larger recycling order that Earth has always maintained. Across Earth's surface, life spreads as a thin and active layer, a living film over rock, water, and air. This biosphere is not separate from the planet beneath it. It depends on sunlight, liquid water, stable chemistry, and the slow cycling of elements through soil, sea, and atmosphere. It includes forests, grasslands, wetlands, reefs, plankton-rich waters, fungi in leaf litter, microbes in the deep subsurface, and organisms drifting high in the air. It also includes countless interactions among these forms. Life does not exist as isolated bodies placed side by side. It exists as exchange. Energy enters mostly through sunlight. Matter moves from organism to organism, from living tissue to waste, from waste to soil and water. and from those environments into new life again. In this region, the idea of reset becomes biological in a general sense. Before reaching the death of an individual human being, it is necessary to see that life on Earth persists precisely because individuals do not last. Ecosystems endure through turnover. At the base of most ecosystems are organisms that capture energy and build organic matter from simpler substances. Plants, algae, and certain microorganisms use photosynthesis, the process by which light energy drives the formation of sugars and other molecules from carbon dioxide and water. In doing so, they store energy in chemical form and release oxygen as a byproduct. In the deep ocean and some other dark environments, certain microbes instead use chemical energy from compounds such as hydrogen sulfide or methane. These primary producers support the rest of the food web. Animals eat plants or other animals. Fungi and many microbes break down dead material. At every stage, only part of the energy moves forward. Much is lost as heat through metabolism, the chemical activity that keeps organisms alive. This means that ecosystems require constant input, mostly from the sun, but their matter is reused many times. Leaves become soil. Soil nutrients enter roots. Roots become tissue. Tissue becomes food, waste, or decay. Life is continuous, but no living form holds its materials forever. The surface of a forest offers one example of this slow biological circulation. Trees lift water and dissolved minerals from the ground, use sunlight to build wood and leaf, and release moisture back to the air through tiny openings in their leaves. Insects feed on plants. Birds feed on insects. Mammals browse, hunt, disperse seeds, and alter the ground with movement and waste. When branches fall or trunks die, fungi begin to digest the wood. Beetles tunnel. Microbes soften the tissues and release carbon back into air and soil. Nutrients that had once been locked in living structure become available again to roots, moss, seedlings, and underground networks of microorganisms. The forest floor is therefore not a place beneath life. It is a place where life is broken down and redistributed. Decay is not the opposite of the living system. It is one of its necessary functions. The ocean follows the same broad rule in a different medium. Near the surface, tiny photosynthetic organisms called phytoplankton capture sunlight and support a vast web of life. Small animals feed on them, larger animals feed on those smaller grazers, and so on through fish, marine mammals, birds, and deep scavengers. When organisms die, some of their remains are consumed quickly in the water column. Some sink as marine snow, a slow fall of organic particles, fecal matter, and mineral fragments drifting toward deeper water. Along the way, microbes and animals feed on it, returning part of its carbon and nutrients to active circulation. Some reaches the seafloor and contributes to sediments. In rare cases, under specific conditions, organic matter may be buried for very long periods, but most of it is reused. The ocean, like the forest, is sustained by death as much as by growth. Its abundance depends on a continual transfer of matter through bodies that appear, feed, reproduce, and disappear. Predation reveals another aspect of this turnover. One organism remains alive by consuming another, or by consuming tissues that other organisms have produced. This is not cruelty built into nature in any emotional sense. It is the energetic structure of life on a planet where complex bodies require concentrated chemical energy. Herbivores consume plant matter. Carnivores consume herbivores or other carnivores. Parasites draw from hosts while sometimes allowing them to live for long periods. Scavengers feed on the dead. Decomposers reduce what remains to simpler components. Across these pathways, no organism truly stands outside the wider exchange. Even an apex predator eventually becomes food for microbes, insects, and soil communities. Ecological status does not exempt anything from return. Reproduction keeps lineages going while allowing individuals to end. Genes pass from one generation to the next through copying with variation. In sexual reproduction, inherited information is combined from more than one parent, producing new combinations. In asexual reproduction, copying is more direct, though mutation still introduces change over time. Either way, life persists not because one organism continues indefinitely, but because information and material processes are extended across generations. A tree drops seeds, a fish releases eggs, a fungus sends spores into air, a mammal gives birth and provides care for a limited span. The body is temporary, but the lineage can continue if environmental conditions allow. This does not mean life defeats death. It means life is structured around it. The generation replaces the generation before it, drawing upon its inheritance and then yielding place in turn. Ecosystems are also shaped by disturbance, which acts as a broader kind of biological reset. Fire can clear a forest and return nutrients to soil through ash. Floods can redistribute sediments and open new channels for life. Storms can tear canopies apart and create gaps where seedlings establish themselves. Drought can reduce populations and favor more resistant species. On coral reefs, bleaching events caused by heat stress can remove much living cover, sometimes followed by partial recovery if conditions improve, though recovery is uncertain and often incomplete. In grasslands, grazing and fire may help maintain open habitat by preventing woody dominance. Disturbance does not always destroy ecological function. Under some conditions, it renews it. What matters is scale, intensity, frequency, and the resilience of the organisms involved. Here again, a reset is not a return to origin. It is a rearrangement of opportunity after loss. Microbial life deepens the pattern further. Bacteria, archaea, fungi, and microscopic protists carry out many of the chemical transformations on which larger organisms depend. They fix nitrogen, break down cellulose and lignin, digest dead flesh, ferment sugars, and help recycle elements in soil, water, and within animal bodies. The human body itself lives in close relationship with microbial communities on skin, in the gut, and across other surfaces. The biosphere is therefore not only made of visible plants and animals, it is built on unseen labor. When a body dies, microbes often become the first agents of change, beginning the return of organized tissue to the wider environment. Even before reaching that stage in detail, biology already shows that life is inseparable from microscopic recycling. At the scale of the biosphere, individuality matters, but persistence belongs more fully to systems. A meadow survives through the replacement of grasses, insects, and burrowing animals. A reef survives through the repeated settlement, growth, death, and replacement of coral colonies and associated species. A wetland survives by cycling water, trapping sediment, feeding microbes, and supporting organisms whose bodies come and go. Ecological continuity is therefore a pattern built from impermanence. It does not protect each organism from ending. It requires that endings happen in ways that allow matter and energy to keep moving. This region offers a clear answer before the story narrows toward the human body. In living systems, death is not foreign to life. It is one of the mechanisms by which life continues. The fallen leaf feeds the soil. The dead fish feeds scavengers and microbes. The decayed log supports seedlings and fungi. The vanished grazer has already shaped the grassland through its feeding, trampling, waste, and reproduction. The individual closes, but the system remains open. The biosphere therefore presents reset not as a mysterious interruption, but as a rule of living continuity. One body ceases to function. Its materials do not vanish. Its effects do not vanish. Its energy has already been spent in motion, growth, heat, work, and reproduction. Its matter returns to circulation. Life on Earth persists through this steady exchange, calm in principle even when harsh in experience. In the living surface of the planet, death already stands not only as an ending, but as a passage through which the larger web remains alive. Within the living surface of Earth, the human organism appears at first to stand apart. It builds language, records memory outside the body, reshapes landscapes, studies distant galaxies, and reflects on its own ending. Yet beneath these achievements, the human body remains a biological structure formed from the same materials and governed by the same constraints as other living things. It is an organized temporary arrangement of water, carbon compounds, minerals, salts, and stored energy, maintained only through constant exchange with the environment. It does not manufacture itself from nothing. It takes in air, water, food, and heat conditions from the surrounding world and uses them to sustain a narrow state of order. In this region, the question of reset comes closer to the individual, but it still begins from the outside. Before death can be understood as the ending of a person, the person must first be understood as a living system assembled from older matter and dependent on continuous flow. The body begins as a single fertilized cell carrying inherited genetic information in deoxyribonucleic acid, the molecule that stores biological instructions. That cell divides, differentiates, and gives rise to tissues with specialized functions. Muscles contract, bones support, blood transports gases, nutrients, hormones, and wastes. The lungs exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with the air. The digestive system breaks food into smaller molecules that can be absorbed and used. The kidneys regulate water balance and remove dissolved waste products. The immune system recognizes threats and responds to injury or infection. The nervous system coordinates sensation, movement, memory, and internal control. Each of these systems depends on the others. None operates in true isolation. The human organism exists as a coordinated whole only because millions of smaller processes occur together, second by second, without pause. Water forms the larger share of the body by mass in most stages of life. It fills cells, carries dissolved substances in blood and lymph, supports chemical reactions, lubricates joints, and helps regulate temperature. Oxygen drawn from the air is delivered to tissues, where cells use it to release energy from food molecules through controlled chemical pathways. Glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals enter through nourishment that ultimately comes from other living things or from environments shaped by life. Calcium once dissolved in ancient seas may become part of bone. Iron forged in long-dead stars becomes part of hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein in blood. Sodium and potassium ions move across cell membranes and help generate nerve impulses. Phosphorus becomes part of energy-carrying molecules and cellular structure. The body therefore appears not as a sealed possession, but as an active borrowing from world and cosmos alike. This borrowing never stops. The air breathed in a single day contains atoms inhaled by countless organisms in the past. Water drunk today may once have moved through cloud, river, root, glacier, ocean, and blood. Food contains the transformed substance of soil minerals, microbial work, plant growth, and animal metabolism. The body uses these inputs to replace worn molecules, build new tissue, and maintain the chemical gradients on which life depends. Skin cells are shed and replaced. Cells lining the gut are renewed rapidly. Bone, though seemingly solid and permanent, is constantly remodeled by cells that break down and rebuild mineral structure. Blood cells are produced in marrow and later removed when they age. Proteins are synthesized and degraded. Fats are stored and mobilized. Even in quiet rest, the organism is not fixed. It is a pattern held together by turnover. This constant renewal can create the impression that the body remakes itself completely and therefore escapes continuity. But biological identity does not depend on the permanence of each molecule. It depends on the maintenance of organization. A human being remains recognizably the same organism through time because structure, memory, and regulation preserve continuity across replacement. Cells do not exchange at equal rates. Some neurons may persist for many decades. Some molecules in eye lenses endure for extraordinarily long periods. Other tissues renew quickly. The body is therefore neither entirely stable nor entirely replaced. It is a layered continuity, with some components lasting longer than others, all held within systems of repair and regulation that never fully stop while life continues. Energy use defines the organism as clearly as structure does. Metabolism, once defined as the sum of the chemical processes that sustain life, can be understood in plainer terms as the body's continual conversion of matter and energy into maintenance, movement, growth, repair, and heat. A person sitting quietly is still expending energy to keep the heart beating, the lungs moving, the brain active, ions distributed properly across membranes, and body temperature within survivable limits. Walking, speaking, thinking, digesting, healing, and resisting infection all draw from this ongoing budget. The body therefore resembles not a statue but a flame kept within boundaries. It endures only because fuel continues to arrive and the conditions for controlled reaction remain intact. Once these flows fail beyond recovery, the organized pattern begins to loosen. The human body also depends on countless non-human organisms. Microbial communities in the gut help digest food components, produce certain vitamins, and influence immune development. Microbes on the skin occupy space and interact with the body's defenses. In health, the organism is not purely singular in composition. It is a partnership structured by evolution and maintained by internal conditions. This does not weaken the reality of individuality. It shows that individuality in biology often includes cooperative systems within defined boundaries. The human body is one organism, but it is never a lonely one. Its life depends on relations both inside and outside itself. Growth and aging further reveal the body as a changing arrangement rather than a fixed possession. In early life, development proceeds rapidly as tissues expand, connections are formed, and functional capacities increase. Through maturity, repair and regulation hold the body within workable ranges despite daily injury and stress. With aging, the balance gradually shifts. Damage accumulates. Repair becomes less efficient. Cellular senescence. A state in which cells stop dividing and alter their behavior increases in some tissues. DNA damage, protein misfolding, chronic inflammation, vascular change, and other processes contribute to declining resilience. aging is not a separate event added onto life from outside. It is part of the long cost of maintaining order in a material system exposed to time. The body continues to function, often for many decades, but its margin of recovery narrows. In this narrowing, the human place in nature becomes clearer. No organ is exempt from wear. No tissue is entirely self-sufficient. Every heartbeat relies on ion gradients, oxygen delivery, muscular structure, and electrical coordination. Every thought depends on the stability of cells that require blood flow, fuel, and balanced chemistry. The body can achieve extraordinary acts of endurance, healing, and adaptation, but all of them remain bounded by physical limits. What is called a self in daily life rests on a biological infrastructure that must be constantly sustained and can never be sustained forever. This understanding does not reduce human significance to chemistry alone. It places significance inside the actual conditions that make a person possible. A life is lived through a body that is made from planetary matter, energized by the sun through food webs, shaped by inherited information, and maintained through endless interchange with its surroundings. The organism is individual, yet not separate from the wider world that feeds it and receives its wastes. It is continuous, yet only through ceaseless replacement. It is stable, yet only as an active process. In this region, the idea of reset draws very near. The human body is already a history of small resets carried out every day through repair, renewal, sleep, immune response, and cellular replacement. It persists by correcting disorder again and again. But this capacity is finite. One day, the larger reset that no body avoids will arrive when repair can no longer preserve the whole. That later threshold belongs to the next inward layer. Here, it is enough to see the person as biology first, a temporary living order assembled from older matter sustained by flow, and destined to return its borrowed substance to the world from which it comes. The boundary of individual life is not a sharp line visible from outside in every case. It is a physiological transition in which the coordinated processes that maintain the organism as a whole cease and cannot be restored. In ordinary experience, life seems present when the chest rises, the heart beats, the skin is warm, the eyes respond, and the body moves with purpose or reflex. Yet these outward signs are only the surface of a deeper arrangement. A living human being remains alive because circulation delivers oxygen and nutrients. Breathing supports gas exchange. The brain coordinates awareness and basic regulation. Cells maintain chemical gradients across membranes, and organs act together in continuous balance. Biological death begins when this integrated activity fails beyond recovery. In this region, the idea of reset passes through a narrow gate. The person is still physically present, but the organized living process that made that body an active self reaches its limit and begins to fall silent. For most of human history, death is judged by visible stillness. Breathing stops, pulse cannot be felt, the body cools, the face loses animation. These signs remain important, but modern medicine clarifies that death is not a single instant shared identically in every tissue. Different cells and organs tolerate interruption for different lengths of time. Hair and nails do not continue true growth after death, though changes in the skin can create that impression. Some cells remain metabolically active for a short span after the person has died. Sperm or certain skin cells may survive longer than delicate brain tissue under specific conditions. This unevenness means that the end of the organism is not the simultaneous extinction of all biological activity in every part. It is the irreversible loss of the body's ability to function as an integrated whole. Circulation lies near the center of this threshold. The The heart pumps blood through vessels, carrying oxygen from the lungs, glucose and other nutrients from digestion or storage, hormones from glands, immune cells to where they are needed, and waste products toward organs that remove or process them. When circulation stops, blood flow ceases. Tissues no longer receive the steady supply that supports aerobic metabolism, the oxygen-based energy production on which most cells rely. The brain, heart muscle, and kidneys are especially sensitive to this interruption. Within seconds of complete cardiac arrest, consciousness is lost because the brain can no longer sustain organized activity without continuous perfusion, the passage of blood through its tissues. The person collapses not because some abstract life force departs, but because the material conditions of neural coordination fail almost at once. Breathing is joined to this process. The lungs do not simply move air in and out. They provide a large, thin surface where oxygen enters blood and carbon dioxide leaves it. As long as breathing continues effectively and circulation carries blood past the alveoli, the tiny air sacs of the lungs, this exchange sustains the chemistry needed for life. If breathing stops, oxygen levels in the blood fall and carbon dioxide rises. If circulation also stops, the problem deepens immediately because even oxygen already present in the lungs cannot be delivered to tissues. In some medical emergencies, breathing fails before the heart stops. In others, the heart stops first, and breathing then ceases almost immediately or becomes ineffective. The body's vital systems are linked so tightly that failure in one rapidly threatens the rest. The brain gives this threshold its most intimate meaning because it supports consciousness, memory access, sensation, voluntary action, and many automatic functions required for survival. The brainstem helps regulate breathing, heart rate, swallowing, wakefulness, and reflexes. The cerebral cortex supports complex perception, reasoning, language, and much of what is usually understood as personal awareness. When blood flow and oxygen supply fall below critical levels, neurons cannot maintain the electrochemical balance that allows them to signal. Ion gradients collapse. Neurotransmitter release becomes disordered. Electrical activity weakens and then fails. At first, these changes may be reversible if circulation and oxygenation are restored quickly enough. Beyond a certain point, however, cellular injury becomes too severe. Membranes break down, swelling and inflammation increase, and irreversible damage spreads. The living pattern that once supported a person's inner world can no longer be reassembled. Medicine therefore distinguishes between states that resemble death and death itself. A person may be unconscious, deeply sedated, hypothermic, or in a coma and still be alive if integrated function persists. Even severe brain injury does not automatically equal death. What matters is whether circulation, respiration, and neurological function remain recoverable in meaningful integrated form. In current medical practice, death is determined either by irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions, or by irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, under strict clinical standards. These are not competing ideas of death so much as two pathways to the same conclusion. In one, the body has irreversibly stopped supporting blood flow and breathing. In the other, even if machines maintain circulation and oxygen movement for a time, the organism has irreversibly lost the central integrative function of the whole brain. The word irreversible matters. It does not mean that every molecule is inactive or that every cell has already decayed. It means that, given the actual conditions and available interventions, the coordinated life of the person cannot return. A stopped heart may sometimes be restarted. Breathing may sometimes be supported. Hypothermia can slow injury and allow recovery after intervals that would otherwise be fatal. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation can restore circulation in some cases. Intensive care can temporarily support organ systems. Because of these possibilities, the boundary of death in medicine is approached carefully. The body can move toward the edge and, under certain conditions, come back. But once the loss of function becomes truly irreversible, death has occurred even if some local biological processes continue for a while in isolated tissues. At this threshold, the body changes quickly. Skin may become pale or grey as circulation ceases. Muscles relax. Pupils may stop responding to light. Breathing ends or becomes agonal, a term for ineffective gasping movements that can occur near the time of death and do not represent sustained recovery. Warmth begins slowly to leave the body because metabolism no longer produces heat in organized fashion. Yet the most important change remains invisible. The unified regulation that held trillions of cells in common purpose has failed. The organism is no longer maintaining itself against entropy, the tendency toward disorder in physical systems. While alive, the body delays disorder through constant work. At death, that work stops. This is the deepest meaning of the boundary. Death is not simply stillness. Sleep is stillness. Anesthesia can be stillness. Some forms of paralysis can produce stillness. Death is the end of the dynamic coordination that makes stillness temporary in those other states. It is the loss of return. The heart no longer drives flow. The lungs no longer sustain exchange. The brain no longer integrates the body or gives rise to awareness. The person, as a living biological whole, is no longer present in function, even though the body remains present in matter. In this inward layer, reset begins with cessation. The organism that constantly repaired, regulated, and renewed itself can no longer do so. The threshold is narrow, physical, and unsentimental. It marks the end of one organized pattern, not the disappearance of substance. The body remains. The cells do not all fail at once. The tissues will follow their own timelines, but the individual life has crossed its biological boundary. From this point onward, the body is no longer a self-maintaining whole. It is entering another order governed not by recovery and regulation, but by the chemistry and physics of breakdown. After the body crosses the boundary of individual life, the next inward region is the brain, where the fading of consciousness follows the fading of energy supply with remarkable speed. The brain is a physical organ of soft tissue, rich in blood vessels, densely packed with neurons and support cells, and dependent on continuous circulation more than almost any other part of the body, though it makes thought, memory, perception, language, emotion, and self-awareness possible. It does so only through ordinary material processes. It requires oxygen, glucose, salts in correct balance, stable temperature, and constant removal of metabolic waste. It remains active because billions of cells maintain tiny differences in electrical charge across their membranes and communicate through carefully regulated chemical signals. Consciousness, in scientific terms, is not a separate substance added to the brain from outside. It is understood as arising from organized brain activity, though the exact mechanisms by which subjective experience emerges remain incompletely understood. In this region, the question of reset passes through the most intimate layer of living function. What fades here is not only organ activity, but the neural basis of awareness itself. Even at rest, the brain uses a large share of the body's energy relative to its size. This high demand leaves it vulnerable to interruption. Neurons do not store large energy reserves. They rely on a steady stream of oxygen and glucose delivered through blood flow. When circulation stops, that delivery ends at once. Within seconds, consciousness is typically lost. The person no longer responds because the coordinated electrical activity needed for wakeful awareness can no longer be sustained. This collapse is not the same as falling asleep. Sleep is an active, regulated state in which the brain remains organized and metabolically supported. Under cardiac arrest or profound oxygen loss, by contrast, organized signaling begins to fail because the physical conditions that support it are vanishing. The brain's silence begins as a problem of energy. Under normal conditions, neurons maintain ion gradients across their membranes. Sodium, potassium, calcium, and other ions are held in unequal concentrations inside and outside cells by protein pumps that consume energy. These gradients allow neurons to generate action potentials, the rapid electrical pulses by which signals travel, and to release neurotransmitters at synapses, the junctions where one cell communicates with another. When oxygen supply ceases, energy production falls sharply. Without enough adenosine triphosphate, the main energy-carrying molecule of the cell, ion pumps begin to fail. Membranes depolarize, meaning the usual electrical differences across them weaken or collapse. Signaling becomes disordered. In some regions, neurons may release large amounts of excitatory neurotransmitters such as glutamate, which can overactivate nearby cells and contribute to injury. The same chemistry that supports thought in life begins to unravel under deprivation. As this disruption spreads, large-scale brain activity changes. Electroencephalography, which records electrical activity from the scalp, can show slowing and then flattening under severe oxygen deprivation, though the exact pattern depends on conditions and timing. Not every neuron fails at the same instant. Some regions are more vulnerable than others. The cerebral cortex, heavily involved in perception, language, and reflective awareness, is highly sensitive. The hippocampus, essential for forming new memories, is also vulnerable. The brainstem may continue limited function briefly under conditions that already eliminate conscious awareness, or it too may fail rapidly if the insult is severe, because the brain is layered in function as well as structure. The fading of awareness may not be a perfectly uniform event, yet the general sequence is clear. As blood flow and oxygen fall, higher order organization is lost first or most clearly. And with continued deprivation, deeper regulatory functions also fail. This helps explain why experiences near the edge of death can be fragmented, confused, or difficult to place in reliable sequence. The brain under severe stress does not behave like a clear recorder. It is chemically unstable, metabolically compromised, and often affected by carbon dioxide changes, stress hormones, drugs, prior illness, and fluctuating perfusion. Memory formation may be incomplete or distorted. Perception may separate from accurate sensory input. A person revived after temporary circulatory arrest may later report vivid images, altered time sense, or emotional intensity. But those reports arise from a brain passing through extreme physiological conditions, rather than from evidence that normal conscious function continues independently of the brain. Research documents that such experiences occur. It remains uncertain exactly how each feature is generated in neural terms, but the evidence still places them within the biology of a stressed and recovering nervous system. One important feature of the fading brain is that loss of consciousness can happen before widespread structural destruction is complete. Function fails first because function depends on ongoing energy flow. A brain can look largely intact in gross physical form for a time after circulation stops. yet no longer support awareness because the fine physiological processes have collapsed. This distinction matters. The self, in lived human terms, depends less on the mere presence of tissue than on organized activity within that tissue. A silent but still physically present cortex is not enough to produce experience. The arrangement must be active in a precise, coordinated way. When that coordination cannot be sustained, the inner world closes even before the organ has visibly changed. If circulation is restored quickly enough, some of this process can reverse. Ion gradients can be re-established. Neurons can resume signaling, and awareness may return partially or fully depending on the extent of injury. This is why rapid resuscitation matters, but the window is limited. Prolonged deprivation leads to swelling, oxidative stress, inflammation, mitochondrial failure, and membrane damage. Cells may die by necrosis, an uncontrolled form of death associated with rupture and inflammation, or by apoptosis, a more regulated cellular self-destruction pathway that can occur in some contexts of injury. These microscopic outcomes unfold over time. The immediate loss of awareness is fast, but the full tissue response continues over minutes, hours, and longer. The fading brain is therefore both an event and a process sudden in the collapse of consciousness, gradual in the spread of cellular injury. Temperature can alter this timeline. Cooling reduces metabolic demand and can help preserve tissue under certain circumstances. This is why hypothermia may sometimes extend the period during which recovery remains possible, and why controlled temperature management is used in some critical care settings after resuscitation. Drugs can also suppress brain activity profoundly without causing death, as in anesthesia, but they do so in the context of preserved circulation and controlled conditions. These examples show again that silence in the brain is not equal in all cases. What makes death final is not mere quiet, but irreversible loss of the conditions required for organized function. The difference between deep anesthesia and death is not how still the patient looks. It is whether the neural system remains supported and recoverable. At the level of subjective life, this fading marks the disappearance of the ordinary features by which a person knows and inhabits the world. Vision depends on active visual pathways and cortical processing. Sound requires functioning auditory circuits. Memory retrieval depends on intact networks. Attention, language, self-recognition, emotional regulation, and bodily awareness all depend on the coordinated work of distributed systems. When those systems lose energy and coherence, the continuity of experience breaks. Science can describe this breakdown in terms of blood flow, neurotransmitters, cellular gradients, and network failure. It cannot directly observe the last moment of subjectivity from within the person who experiences it. Observations indicate that consciousness is lost rapidly after complete circulatory arrest. The precise character of that final transition remains uncertain because it lies at the border between measurable physiology and first-person experience, which cannot be fully captured once the subject can no longer report. In this region, the idea of reset is stripped of metaphor. The brain does not drift into another organized state known to science after death. It loses the capacity to generate the patterns associated with conscious life. Thought does not continue in the known absence of functioning neural tissue. Memory does not float free as an independent biological process once the networks that encode and retrieve it have irreversibly failed. What remains is the organ itself, moving from unstable silence towards cellular breakdown. The fading brain therefore marks the inward end of the living person, as science can presently describe it. The body may still be warm for a while. Some cells may still carry out local chemistry, but the coordinated neural basis of awareness is gone, and with it the active inner world that made the organism a conscious self. At the edge where life nearly ends but does not fully end, reports sometimes emerge that seem to resist simple explanation. People revived after cardiac arrest, severe trauma, anesthesia complications, drowning, or other critical events may describe vivid perceptions, unusual calm, detachment from the body, movement through darkness, encounters with bright light, or a powerful sense of meaning. These accounts are often grouped under the term near-death experience, a phrase used for a pattern of reported mental events associated with life-threatening conditions or situations believed by the person to be close to death. Scientific study does not dismiss these reports as meaningless. It treats them as real human experiences that occur under extreme physiological and psychological stress. At the same time, it does not take them as proof that awareness continues independently after biological death. In this region, the question of reset enters a zone where testimony is vivid, but evidence must still be weighed by the standards of observation, measurement, and cautious interpretation. Near-death experiences share certain recurring features across many reports, though not every feature appears in every case. Some people describe peace or lack of pain. Some describe leaving the body and viewing events from an elevated perspective. Some report entering a tunnel-like darkness or moving toward a bright presence. Some describe encountering deceased relatives, panoramic memory, or a boundary beyond which return does not occur. Others report distressing experiences marked by fear, confusion, emptiness, or isolation. Cultural expectations appear to shape some aspects of these accounts, especially their imagery and interpretation, but not all. The recurrence of broad features across different populations has led researchers to treat the phenomenon as worthy of study rather than as mere invention. Still, recurrence alone does not identify cause. Human brains under stress may produce similar patterns because they share common biology. One difficulty in evaluating these experiences lies in timing. A person who later reports vivid awareness during cardiac arrest may not have formed the experience during the period of deepest physiological shutdown itself. The memory could arise in the seconds before loss of consciousness, during partial recovery, or during fragmented periods when brain activity is returning but not yet normal. The brain under such conditions is not a precise clock. Memory encoding can be distorted. Sequences may be compressed, rearranged, or filled in after the fact. Sedative drugs, pain medications, oxygen deprivation, elevated carbon dioxide, fear, prior beliefs, sleep-related phenomena, and the disordered chemistry of crisis may all affect what is experienced and how it is later recalled. Therefore, a report that feels continuous and certain to the person who tells it does not by itself establish a continuous stream of accurate perception during a period when the brain is known to be severely compromised. Research has explored several possible contributors. Oxygen deprivation can alter visual processing, attention, and consciousness. Elevated carbon dioxide has been associated in some studies with unusual perceptions and intense experiences, though findings are not uniform. Disturbance in the temporal and parietal regions of the brain, areas involved in body representation and spatial perception, may contribute to out-of-body sensations. Rapid eye movement, sleep intrusion, in which features of dreaming overlap with wakefulness, has also been proposed as one factor in some cases. Neurotransmitter disruption, including changes involving glutamate, serotonin, dopamine, and endogenous opioids, may influence perception, emotion, and memory during extreme stress. None of these mechanisms alone explains every report in complete detail, but taken together, they show that the brain possesses several known pathways by which intense and unusual conscious states can arise without requiring consciousness to detach from the body. The out-of-body component has received particular attention because it appears, on the surface, to offer a testable claim about perception. If a person accurately reports events or details that could not have been seen from the body's actual position, this would carry special weight. Some prospective hospital studies have attempted to examine this by placing hidden visual targets in clinical areas where cardiac arrests may occur. Results so far have been limited. A few cases include partial recollections of events during resuscitation that align broadly with what happened, such as hearing voices or recalling procedures, but clear verified perception of hidden targets under controlled conditions has not been demonstrated in a robust and repeatable way. This does not mean that all reports are false. It means the strongest claims have not yet received strong confirming evidence. Observations indicate that people can later recall aspects of resuscitation in some circumstances. It remains uncertain exactly when and how those memories are formed in each case. Memory itself complicates the picture. Human recollection is reconstructive, not simply replayed from perfect storage. Even ordinary memories change with retelling, emotion, suggestion, and later interpretation. Under conditions of medical emergency, the likelihood of fragmentation increases. People may awaken into confusion, hear fragments of conversation, infer events from context, merge dreams with perception, or remember sensations that occurred before unconsciousness but feel later in time. A striking experience can also become more coherent in retrospect as the mind organizes it into narrative. This does not make the memory dishonest. It reflects how memory works. Scientific caution therefore requires distinguishing sincerity from accuracy and vividness from independent confirmation. Some researchers note that near-death experiences can have lasting effects on those who report them. Individuals may become less fearful of death, more reflective, more spiritually oriented, or more focused on relationships and meaning. These after effects are psychologically important. They show that experiences at the border of life can alter a person deeply, yet transformative impact is not evidence about metaphysical truth. A dream, a psychotic episode, a childbirth crisis, a meditation retreat, combat, or a major loss can also change a person's outlook for life. Human significance and factual explanation are not the same question. An experience may be profoundly meaningful while still arising entirely within brain and body. There is also a selection effect in the available data. Reports come only from those who survive and can later communicate. The experiences of those who do not return from cardiac arrest are unknown. This matters because the studied population is not a complete sample of all who approach death physiologically. It is a subset shaped by survival, medical circumstances, memory retention, willingness to report, and cultural language available for telling the story. In addition, many life-threatening events do not produce any remembered unusual experience at all. Silence is common. The dramatic accounts are more likely to be shared, published, and remembered socially, which can make them seem more universal than they are. Scientific consensus at present is cautious. Near-death experiences are recognized as genuine reported phenomena associated with extreme conditions. Research supports the view that they can arise from altered brain function during crisis, loss of oxygen, changing chemistry, disrupted body representation, and the complex period of recovery. There is no widely accepted evidence that they demonstrate survival of consciousness after irreversible death. That conclusion would require stronger, repeatable, independently verified data than currently exists. At the same time, science does not claim to have explained every feature completely. The exact neural sequence producing the full richness of these experiences remains uncertain, partly because such events are difficult to predict, measure in real time, and study under controlled circumstances. This uncertainty is important to state plainly. What is known is that vivid experiences can occur near death, and can feel more real than ordinary waking life. What is known is that memory under extreme stress is vulnerable to distortion. What is known is that the brain under crisis can generate unusual states of awareness. What remains uncertain is the precise mechanism of every reported feature, and whether all cases can eventually be explained in the same way. The uncertainty does not license speculation beyond evidence. It marks the current edge of research. In this region, reset remains unproven as continuation of the self beyond death. The evidence supports a more restrained view. The human mind, when pushed toward its physiological limit, can produce remarkable experiences that reflect both brain vulnerability and the depth of subjective life. These experiences deserve study and respect, but they do not overturn the broader scientific picture established by neurology and critical care. When the brain loses the capacity for organized function irreversibly, consciousness as science understands it comes to an end. Near-death reports belong to the borderland before that final closure is complete, or to the turbulent path back from it. They illuminate the threshold, but they do not show that the threshold has been crossed and reversed in a fully separate realm. Once the integrated life of the organism has ended, the body does not immediately become chaos. For a brief time it still retains the shape of the person, the arrangement of limbs, the familiar outline of face, the stored chemistry of cells, and the internal architecture built over years of growth and repair. Yet something fundamental has changed. The active balance that held temperature, acidity, salt concentration, blood flow, oxygen delivery, and waste removal within survivable limits is no longer operating. The body is no longer correcting itself. It is no longer spending energy to hold disorder back. In this region, the question of reset becomes physical in the clearest possible way. The living order does not vanish in an instant, but it stops being maintained, and from that moment onward the chemistry of the body follows a different path. This is the beginning of post-mortem change. The set of processes that unfold after death as organized physiology gives way to passive physical law and microbial action. The first changes arise from the end of circulation and breathing. Without a pumping heart, blood no longer moves through vessels. It settles under gravity into lower parts of the body, a process that contributes to livor mortis, the purplish discoloration that develops in dependent areas after death. This settling does not happen all at once. It becomes more apparent over hours and can shift early on if the body is moved, before later becoming more fixed. At the same time, the body begins to cool toward the temperature of its surroundings, a process known as algor mortis. While alive, metabolism continuously produces heat and circulation distributes it. After death, no new heat is generated in organized fashion, and existing heat is gradually lost by radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. The rate depends on many conditions, including air temperature, clothing, body size, humidity, and whether the body lies in water, open air, or enclosed space. Cooling therefore follows general physical principles but does not provide a simple universal clock. Muscles also change in a characteristic way. In life, muscle contraction and relaxation depend on energy stored in adenosine triphosphate and on the controlled movement of calcium within cells. After death, energy production stops. Remaining stores are used up. Calcium regulation fails. The protein filaments involved in contraction become locked in place, and the muscles stiffen. This stiffening is called rigor mortis. It typically begins within hours, develops through the body, and later fades as tissue breakdown progresses. Rigor is not a sign of lingering life. It is a chemical consequence of life having ended. The same molecular machinery that once produced movement now freezes temporarily because the energetic conditions required for release are gone. Later, as proteins degrade, stiffness passes and the body becomes flaccid again. Inside cells, the loss of oxygen and circulation leads to rapid chemical change. Aerobic metabolism stops, and cells shift briefly to less efficient anaerobic pathways if they still have substrate available. Lactic acid accumulates, acidity changes. Membranes that required constant energy to maintain their gradients become increasingly permeable. Organelles swell, enzymes leak from compartments that once kept them contained. Among the most important of these processes is autolysis, a term for self-digestion in which the body's own enzymes begin to break down cells and tissues after regulatory systems fail. This begins especially in organs rich in enzymes and water, such as the pancreas, stomach lining, and liver. The word self-digestion may sound dramatic, but it describes an ordinary chemical consequence of lost compartmental control. During life, membranes separate digestive enzymes from living tissue or keep them in regulated locations. After death, those boundaries weaken. The digestive tract plays a special role in the early changes of the dead body. During life, the intestines contain large populations of microbes that help process food and interact with the immune system. These microbes are normally confined within the gut and held in relationship with living tissues by barriers, circulation, and immune responses. After death, those controls fail. The immune system no longer restrains microbial spread. Tissues lose oxygen and structural resistance. Bacteria begin to move beyond their previous boundaries and multiply through adjoining tissues. This microbial expansion will later become a major force in decomposition, but even in the early phase it contributes to the breakdown of the body's internal order. The body that once hosted microbial life under careful regulation becomes a nutrient-rich environment that microbes can increasingly exploit. Blood chemistry also changes. Without circulation, oxygen is no longer replenished and carbon dioxide is no longer removed. Acidity increases in many tissues. Cells release potassium and other substances as membranes fail. Clotting may occur in some areas, while elsewhere blood remains fluid. Vessels lose tone, pressure disappears, red blood cells begin to break down over time. The precise sequence varies with cause of death, environmental conditions, and medical circumstances preceding death. A body that dies after prolonged illness may enter this phase differently from one that dies suddenly in cold water or from severe trauma. Nevertheless, the general principle is the same. The chemical environment of life is not stable on its own. It must be maintained continuously. Once maintenance ends, the internal landscape shifts quickly away from the narrow range compatible with living function. The skin, often thought of as a durable boundary, also begins to change. As circulation stops, colour alters. Moist surfaces dry if exposed to air. Areas in contact with surfaces may show pressure pallor, lighter colouring caused by the absence of pooled blood where weight compresses the vessels. Small injuries may become more apparent as surrounding tissues lose normal tone and moisture. Over time, the outer layers can loosen, especially in damp conditions. These visible changes matter in forensic settings, but they also carry a broader biological meaning. The body's boundary is no longer being repaired, perfused, or defended. It remains a surface, but no longer an active one. The eyes provide another clear example of post-mortem transition. In life, tear production, blinking, intraocular pressure, and metabolic activity help maintain the surface and internal state of the eye. After death, the cornea may become cloudy if the eyes remain open, and pressure changes can occur. The pupils no longer respond because the nervous pathways and muscle control required for response have ceased. Such details are often among the earliest visible signs that the body is no longer participating in the dynamic regulation of life. Form remains, but response is absent. Structure remains, but function does not. What begins in this phase is not yet the full dispersal of the body into the wider environment. The person can still be recognized. Many tissues remain largely intact in gross form, but the central fact is already settled. The body has changed from an active organism into a passive system undergoing transformation. It is no longer using energy to preserve its own complexity. Instead, its complexity begins to unravel through chemistry, gravity, temperature exchange, and microbial opportunity. The direction has reversed. In life, molecules are organized into tissues, tissues into organs, organs into a coordinated self. After death, that hierarchy remains for a while in shape, but not in process. Without process, the structure cannot hold indefinitely. This is the physical meaning of the end of bodily order. The dead body is not empty matter, nor is it matter behaving as it did before. It occupies an intermediate state. It still carries the built form of life, yet it has entered the early chemistry of disassembly. The reset here is not renewal into another living individual. It is the surrender of active biological control. The same tissues that once resisted decay through circulation, immunity, and repair now begin to follow pathways that were always waiting beneath the surface, held back only by life itself. In this inward layer, science offers a calm but exact account. Death ends the body's ability to maintain internal balance, known in physiology as homeostasis, the stable regulation of conditions needed for life. Once homeostasis fails irreversibly, the chemistry of the body changes from preservation to breakdown. Cooling, lividity, stiffness, autolysis, and microbial spread are not separate curiosities. They are expressions of one larger truth. The order of life is expensive, temporary, and constantly defended. When that defense ends, the body begins its return from organized individuality to shared material process. After the first internal order of the body begins to fail, decomposition carries that change outward and onward through a larger biological community. The dead body does not remain separate from the living world for long. It becomes part of an ecological process in which microbes, insects, soil organisms, plants, water and air all play roles shaped by environment and time. In this region, the question of reset becomes unmistakably material. What once stands as a person, bounded by skin and sustained by metabolism, begins to re-enter the wider circulation of life. This return is not immediate dissolution, and it does not proceed in exactly the same way in all settings. Temperature, humidity, burial, clothing, oxygen availability, scavenger access, soil chemistry, and water all alter the path. But the broad rule remains steady. The body becomes a site of consumption, transformation, and redistribution. Microbes are among the first and most constant agents in this change. Even before death, the body contains large microbial communities, especially in the digestive tract. During life, these organisms exist within boundaries maintained by tissues, circulation, immunity, and active repair. After death, those restraints weaken and then disappear. Bacteria spread through the body's interior, especially through softer tissues rich in moisture and nutrients. They digest proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, releasing simpler compounds and gases as byproducts. This process contributes to bloating in many conditions, as gases accumulate within tissues and body cavities. The smell associated with decomposition also arises from this chemical activity, as complex organic matter is broken into volatile molecules that move into the air. These odors are not incidental. They are signals of material transfer already underway, signs that organized tissue is being converted into forms that can enter a wider environment. Insects often join this process quickly when the body's accessible. Flies are especially important in many terrestrial settings. Certain species are drawn to decomposing tissue and may lay eggs in natural openings or wounds. These eggs hatch into larvae that feed on soft tissues, accelerating breakdown. Beetles and other insects may follow at different stages, some feeding on flesh, some on drier remains, some on other insects within the decomposing community. This sequence is not perfectly uniform across all climates and landscapes, but the general pattern is well established. The dead body becomes habitat as well as food. It supports not only one set of consumers, but a changing succession of them. In this way, decomposition is ecological from the beginning. A body no longer maintains itself as one organism. It becomes the center of activity for many organisms. Soft tissues change rapidly compared with bone and some tougher structures. The skin may loosen and separate in places. Internal organs lose recognizable form as microbes and insects break them down. Muscles soften, liquefy in part, or are removed by feeding organisms and decay processes. Fluids can seep into surrounding soil or material. This transfer enriches the immediate environment with nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon compounds, salts, and water. Soil chemistry near a decomposing body may shift markedly for a time. Microbial communities in the ground can change in abundance and composition. Plants growing nearby may later draw upon nutrients released from the remains. The person's tissues, which during life circulate within closed biological boundaries, now cross into open exchange with the local ecosystem. The pace of this return depends strongly on surroundings. In warm, moist, oxygen-rich conditions, decomposition generally proceeds more quickly. Microbes multiply readily. Insect activity is often intense, and soft tissues may disappear over relatively short spans compared with colder or drier conditions. In cold environments, change may slow because microbial metabolism and insect development are reduced. In very dry conditions, tissues may desiccate, meaning they lose water and become leathery or preserved in part, which can slow complete breakdown. In wet, oxygen-poor environments, other pathways dominate. Adipocere, a wax-like substance formed by the transformation of body fats under certain moist conditions, may develop and preserve some tissues temporarily. In acidic bogs, tanning of skin and unusual preservation can occur while bones may weaken. These variations show that decomposition is not one simple script repeated everywhere. It is a family of processes governed by chemistry, biology, and environment. Scavenging animals can also shape the return of the body. Birds, mammals, fish, and smaller creatures may feed on remains when access is possible. This feeding redistributes tissues spatially as well as chemically. Fragments can be carried away. Bones can be scattered. Nutrients enter the bodies of scavengers and later pass onward through their waste. metabolism, or eventual death. In this way, the material of one body can enter multiple food webs. What was once organized as one individual may become dispersed through many organisms and many locations. The transfer is not symbolic, it is literal. Carbon enters new tissues. Nitrogen becomes available to microbes and plants. Minerals move into soil, water, or animal bodies. The ecological reset is therefore not a gentle abstraction. It is direct participation in the metabolism of the living world. Yet decomposition is not only removal, it is transformation through stages. Early decay often features microbial spread, gas formation, and softening. Active decay may follow, marked by strong odour, fluid release, tissue consumption, and rapid mass loss. Later stages leave drier remains, tougher tissues, cartilage, hair, and bone. Throughout these stages, the body becomes less recognizable as an individual human form and more recognizable as a source of nutrients and structure within a local habitat. This shift can appear stark when viewed emotionally, but biologically it continues the same rule already visible across the biosphere. No organism keeps its matter indefinitely. The difference here lies in scale and intimacy. The human form, so carefully maintained in life, is now exposed to the same community of decomposers that has always recycled leaves, roots, insects, birds, and animals across Earth's surface. Burial modifies but does not cancel this process. A buried body is less accessible to insects and scavengers, and the soil environment strongly affects the rate and character of change. Depth, moisture, temperature, oxygen levels, microbial composition, and coffin materials all influence the outcome. Embalming can delay certain processes by temporarily altering tissue chemistry and reducing microbial activity, but it does not provide permanent exemption from decomposition. Cremation follows a different path, rapidly reducing soft tissues and altering bones through high heat. Yet even there the material remains continue to exist in changed form. Whatever the cultural handling of the body, the scientific principle remains consistent. The organized living tissue does not persist forever as living tissue. It enters new chemical and ecological states. In this region, the body's individuality becomes progressively less central than its material availability. What defines the remains biologically is no longer personhood, metabolism, or self-regulation. It is nutrient content, moisture, accessibility, and environment. The same proteins that once formed muscle for movement now serve as substrate for bacteria and larvae. The same lipids that once stored energy or built cell membranes now undergo breakdown, oxidation, or transformation into simpler compounds. The same water that once circulated in blood and cells now evaporates, seeps, or becomes part of microbial and environmental exchange. The passage is one from closed organization to open redistribution. This redistribution has consequences beyond the immediate site. Nutrient pulses from decomposition can shape plant growth, microbial diversity, and insect populations for a time. Carrion, the flesh of dead animals used as food by other organisms, is an important ecological resource in many habitats. Entire species and behavioral patterns depend on the timely availability of the dead. Vultures, burying beetles, blowflies, certain mammals, and many microbes all occupy roles connected to this resource. The existence of such roles reveals that death is not peripheral to ecosystems. It is woven into their function. The dead feed the living, not metaphorically, but through direct flows of matter and energy. In this inward layer, the idea of reset becomes clear in one narrow but powerful sense. Death resets the body's status in nature. No longer an organism defending its boundaries, it becomes a source to be used by other processes. This does not mean the self is biologically reborn. It means the self's material basis is released from personal organization and returned to communal circulation. Decomposition is therefore not simply destruction, it is conversion. One pattern ends, and the components enter many smaller patterns sustained by the living earth. The body that once breathes, thinks, heals, and remembers now feeds microbes, insects, soil, and sometimes plants and animals. Its tissues become part of the larger metabolism of the planet. In that steady transfer, death appears neither as disappearance nor as preservation of the former self. It appears as return. The boundary of the body opens, and the world takes the borrowed matter back. After soft tissues have largely returned to the living environment, the skeleton remains as the slower architecture of the body, a quieter record of former life and a more gradual participant in material return. Bone appears durable because it resists rapid decay better than muscle, skin, and organs. But it is not permanent in any absolute sense. It is a living tissue during life, built and maintained by cells, supplied by blood, and continually remodeled in response to stress, nourishment, hormones, and age. After death, that living maintenance ends, yet the mineralized framework persists for far longer than the softer parts it once supports. In this region, the question of reset enters deep time. The body is no longer being redistributed quickly through flesh and fluid. It is yielding more slowly through mineral, structure, weather, and ground. What remains is less the chemistry of active decomposition than the long surrender of organized matter to Earth itself. Bone is made of two main kinds of substance held together in close association. One is an organic matrix, largely collagen, a protein that gives flexibility and tensile strength. The other is a mineral phase rich in calcium phosphate, mainly in the form of hydroxyapatite crystals, which gives hardness and resistance to compression. During life, this combination produces a material both strong and slightly resilient, capable of growth, repair, and constant adjustment. The skeleton stores minerals, protects organs, enables movement with muscles, and houses marrow where blood cells are produced. Even its apparent solidity is dynamic in life. Cells called osteoclasts break down bone, while osteoblasts build it again. Death ends that renewal. No blood flow continues through marrow. No cells maintain balance. The bone that remains is still structured, but it is no longer alive as tissue. It has entered a purely physical and chemical future. This future unfolds slowly because mineralized structures resist immediate breakdown. Cartilage, tendons, and ligaments may hold bones together for some time after most soft tissues are gone, depending on environment. Later the joints loosen, and the skeleton may separate into individual elements. Weather, scavenging animals, flowing water, gravity, plant roots, and human disturbance can scatter these elements across the landscape or through soil, in dry open ground. Sunlight and changing temperature may crack exposed bone over time. In damp soil, acidity and groundwater chemistry may dissolve minerals gradually. In caves, deserts, peatlands, frozen ground, or arid tombs. Preservation may last far longer than in warm, wet forests or acidic soils. The path varies, but the direction remains the same. Even the skeleton, which seems like the final anchor of bodily identity, yields at last. Soil chemistry plays a major role in this slower return. In neutral or alkaline soils, Bone minerals may survive for centuries or much longer under favourable conditions, in acidic soils. The mineral phase dissolves more readily, and bones may become fragile or disappear entirely over much shorter spans. The collagen component is also vulnerable to microbial attack and chemical degradation. Water moving through soil can carry away dissolved ions, including calcium and phosphate, into surrounding sediments and groundwater. Plant roots may alter the chemistry immediately around buried remains, and fungi or bacteria can contribute to organic breakdown. Thus, the skeleton is not insulated from the environment. It is in conversation with it through slow dissolution, small fractures, pressure, moisture, and chemical exchange. The skull, long bones, teeth, vertebrae, and small bones of the hands and feet do not all persist equally. Density, thickness, exposure, burial conditions, and prior health all matter. Teeth often endure especially well because enamel, the hardest substance in the human body, resists decay more effectively than most other tissues. Dental remains can therefore survive when much else is lost. Yet even enamel can crack, erode, or fragment under sufficient time and environmental stress. What lasts longest is not immortal. It is only slower to change. This distinction matters in the study of death. Human attention often seeks the most durable part of the body, as if endurance might amount to survival. Science sees something different. The longer persistence of bone and teeth extends the timeline of return, but it does not interrupt it. Buried bone may also enter geological pathways if conditions and timescales allow. Most remains do not fossilize. Fossilization is uncommon and requires special circumstances, such as rapid burial, low oxygen, mineral-rich groundwater, and long protection from disturbance. In such cases, original organic material may be replaced or infilled by minerals, preserving shape as stone-like material. Fossils are therefore not preserved bodies in the ordinary sense. They are records formed through replacement and mineral transformation. This possibility underscores again that nature does not usually preserve organisms directly. It preserves traces through altered matter. Even the rare long-term record of a body is generally not the body itself remaining unchanged. It is a new mineral history occupying an old form. At more ordinary timescales, the minerals of the skeleton rejoin Earth through less dramatic means. Calcium and phosphorus released from bone can enter soil solution and later be taken up by plants or bound into new mineral compounds. These elements may move into roots, leaves, seeds, microbes, herbivores, and the bodies of later animals. Phosphorus is especially important because it is essential for energy transfer in living cells, for membranes, and for genetic material. In life, bone serves as a major reservoir of such minerals. After death, that stored reserve slowly opens to the environment. The release may be local and uneven, but over time the concentrated structure of the skeleton becomes part of broader geochemical circulation. What once helped support a person standing upright may later help support a root, a fungus, or the body of another organism. Time deepens the meaning of this change. Human experience tends to notice hours, days, seasons, and years. Bone belongs partly to those scales, but it also stretches beyond them. It can outlast memory in a family. It can survive after names are forgotten. It can remain after buildings fall and languages change. Archaeology and paleoanthropology draw knowledge from that durability. Bones reveal diet, age, disease, injury, ancestry, and movement. They preserve a kind of record because they change slowly enough for traces to endure. Yet the same science that learns from bones also shows their vulnerability. Pressure can crush them, soil can dissolve them, water can transport them, fire can calcine and fracture them. In deep time, no ordinary skeleton remains exempt from transformation. This slower phase of return often feels more final precisely because it is more patient. Soft tissue decay is rapid and obvious. Skeletal change is gradual and often hidden. It takes place under soil, in sediments, beneath vegetation, under flowing water, or across many seasons of exposure. It invites the illusion of permanence because its pace exceeds ordinary attention. But deep time removes that illusion. Mountains erode, river channels shift, sediments bury and uncover. Coastlines advance and retreat. In such a world, even bone is temporary architecture. In this region, reset no longer looks like the quick transfer of flesh to microbes and insects alone. It becomes the long release of mineral form into earth chemistry and landscape history. The human body, once held together by living regulation, first opens through decomposition and then continues opening through skeletal weathering, dissolution, and dispersal. Its most durable structures yield last, but they yield. The return is slower, quieter, and more geological. What remains of individuality at this stage is mainly pattern and trace. The arrangement of a pelvis, the thickness of a femur, the wear on teeth, the healed line of an old fracture, the chemistry preserved in enamel or cortical bone can still tell of one life once lived. Yet these traces persist only because transformation is incomplete, not because transformation has stopped. The material itself is already moving toward other states. Bone becomes sedimentary participant, nutrient source. Archaeological evidence or weathered fragment. It ceases to be a living support and becomes part of Earth's long memory. This inward layer therefore offers one of the calmest answers to the question of reset. Death does not return the body to its beginning, nor does it hold it forever in its final form. It releases the body across multiple timescales. Flesh returns quickly through ecology. Bone returns slowly through chemistry, soil, and time. The person's mineral framework, built from the planet during life, gradually merges back into the planet's own slow cycles. What appears last is still on its way inward toward the same destination, not preservation of the self, but the patient redistribution of matter into the wider ground. After the body is returned through ecology and deepened into earth through bone and mineral, another kind of continuation remains, one that does not depend on living tissue in the dead individual, yet still belongs to the scientific account of what persists. A human life does not end only as chemistry. It also leaves patterns in other bodies, in other brains, in populations, in environments, and in the structures of culture. These patterns are not supernatural survivals of the self. They are material and informational traces carried forward through inheritance, memory, behavior, language, institutions, and altered landscapes in this region. The question of reset turns from tissue to trace. The individual organism has ended, but some consequences continue in forms that can still be studied and described. Death closes the body and the conscious brain, yet it does not erase every effect the person has had on the world. One form of continuation lies in genes. If a person has biological children, some portion of inherited genetic material passes forward into the next generation. This does not preserve a whole person, nor does it store memory or personality in any complete way. Genes influence traits through interaction with development and environment, but they do not contain a finished adult self. Still, heredity is real. Eye structure, aspects of body shape, disease susceptibilities, metabolic tendencies, and many other biological features can be transmitted through generations. Over time, recombination and mutation alter these inheritances, and no descendant is a simple copy of an ancestor. Even so, the line continues, a person's body ends, but some of its biological information remains active in living descendants, mingled with that of many others. This is not immortality. It is continuity through partial inheritance. Genes also continue more broadly in populations. Every living human carries a vast ancestry, and most ancestral genetic contributions are diluted, reshaped, or lost across time. Yet the species itself is an ongoing historical process in which prior bodies contribute to later ones. Evolution acts not on isolated individuals after death, but on the variation and reproduction that occurred while they lived. In that sense, a person contributes to the biological future not only through direct descent, but through belonging to a larger reproductive and social population. Choices about partnership, child rearing, cooperation, migration, nutrition, and health all influence which traits and lineages continue. The dead individual does not remain conscious within that process, yet the process still bears marks of the life once lived. Another form of continuation resides in memory within other minds. A human being exists socially as well as biologically. Faces are recognized, voices are remembered, gestures become familiar, and shared events are stored in the brains of family, friends, colleagues, and communities. After death, these neural traces persist for as long as other people continue to remember. Memory in this sense is physical. It consists of altered synaptic connections, reinforced pathways, and patterns of recall in living brains. It may be vivid or fragmentary, accurate or reshaped by grief and time. It can also change behavior. A remembered parent influences how a child later speaks, chooses, or loves. A dead teacher alters the work of students. A lost friend changes the habits of those who remain. The person is not present as a living consciousness within these brains, but the traces of that person continue to act through memory. Language extends this continuation beyond direct recall. Words once spoken may be repeated. Ideas taught in one lifetime may circulate through many others. A song composed by one person may be learned by strangers decades later. A scientific paper may alter research long after its author dies. A letter, recording, image, or digital message can preserve aspects of style, thought, and expression outside the original brain. These records are not the person themselves. They are externalized traces, stable enough to carry information forward across time and distance. Culture depends on such storage. Human societies remember not only through brains, but through objects, symbols, writing, institutions, and technologies that preserve selected fragments of the past. Death therefore ends the biological individual, but culture can retain and transmit parts of that individual's activity long afterward. The scale of this effect varies greatly. Some people leave traces mainly within a small circle of kin and friends. Others influence thousands, millions, or even billions through political action, art, science, religion, or violence. Fame does not alter the biology of death, but it changes the size of the social and historical footprint. A local craftsperson, a grandmother, a neighbour, or a nurse may profoundly shape only a small human network. Yet within that network the persistence can be deep. By contrast, a public figure may remain widely known while being only weakly remembered in intimate human terms. The scientific point is not the size of the legacy, but its material basis. effects continue where information has been stored and where behavior has been altered. No mystery is required for consequences to outlast the body. The environment also carries memory in a broader sense: a field planted, a house built, a canal dug, a forest cut, a child vaccinated, a species protected, a city polluted, a book printed, a bridge designed, or a war begun, all leave physical changes in the world. Some are small and local. Some persist for centuries. Human beings are ecosystem engineers, builders of symbolic systems, and modifiers of planetary chemistry. A single life participates in these changes through work, consumption, care, waste, and cooperation. Death does not reverse them automatically. The garden remains altered. The river remains contaminated or restored. The language retains a borrowed phrase. The patient continues living because treatment was once given. The consequences of action can therefore survive long after the actor does not. This continuation, however, is uneven and fragile. Memory fades, descendants die, records are lost, languages vanish, buildings collapse, digital archives decay or become unreadable. Social reputations are revised, cultural influence can expand, shrink, or disappear entirely. Even the greatest historical traces are finite when measured against geological time. Most human lives leave only limited records, and many are forgotten outside a few generations. This fragility matters because it prevents social continuation from being mistaken for a stable second life. The self does not remain intact in memory or culture. It is translated into fragments, effects, and stories, all dependent on living carriers and material storage. Yet fragile does not mean unreal. The continuation of a life through others is scientifically ordinary and emotionally significant. Children shaped by care carry forward patterns of attachment. Students carry forward methods of thought. Communities carry forward customs. Institutions carry forward decisions. Harm also continues in this way. Neglect, abuse, and violence can echo through nervous systems, families, and social structures across generations. The legacy of a life is therefore not only what is intentionally created, it includes unintended consequences and the chains of effect set in motion by ordinary acts. Death ends the capacity to alter one's own future actions, but it does not cancel the future shaped by past ones. In this region, reset takes on a subtler meaning. The dead individual is not biologically reset into a new conscious existence supported by evidence, but the world that person once inhabited is not the same after their life has occurred. Other organisms carry genes partly derived from them. Other brains carry memories shaped by them. Social systems contain marks of their labor, care, error, or influence. Landscapes and objects may retain physical traces of their activity. These forms of continuation do not preserve the full subjective self. They preserve effects. A life becomes distributed across inheritance, memory, and altered surroundings. This is the calm scientific account of what remains beyond the body without leaving evidence-based ground. The organism is gone. Consciousness tied to the functioning brain is gone. Yet the person's existence has entered other media. Some of those media are living, such as descendants and memory in others. Some are non-living, such as writing, buildings, tools, and changed environments. All are finite, all can decay. But for a time, sometimes a short time, and sometimes a long one, they extend the reach of one-ended life into the continuing world. In this inward layer, death reveals that not all persistence is biological survival, and not all endings are total erasure. A person does not continue as a functioning self in genes, memories, or culture, but neither does a life vanish without remainder. The reset is incomplete in one important sense. The body ends, yet the patterns it has impressed upon the world continue to move through other bodies, other minds, and other structures. The self closes, the traces remain, and through them the world continues in a form that has been changed by one mortal life. At this depth, the word reset must be examined with care. Nature clearly shows repeated endings followed by new arrangements. Stars die and enrich galaxies. Ecosystems lose individuals and continue through turnover. Bodies cease and return their matter to soil, water, air, and other living forms. Yet none of these processes restores an earlier state in exact form, and none of them preserves the ended individual as the same organized self. In this region, the question is no longer what physically happens after death, because much of that has already been traced through body, brain, decomposition, bone, memory, and inheritance. The question now becomes whether death itself is properly described as a reset. Science can answer part of this by comparing what ends with what continues. It can examine matter, energy, information, and consequence. It can ask what is lost, what is conserved, and what is transformed. The answer that emerges is neither absolute continuation nor absolute repetition. It is the ending of one specific pattern within a world where substance persists and effects continue. In physics, matter and energy are not understood to vanish from ordinary processes. The body, while alive, takes in energy through food and releases energy through work and heat. It exchanges matter constantly with the environment through breathing, eating, drinking, sweating, urinating, growing, healing, and shedding. At death, these exchanges do not stop because matter has disappeared. They stop because the organized system that directs them is no longer active. The body still contains mass. It still contains chemical energy and tissues. Heat still flows from it until temperature equalizes with the surroundings. Later, molecules are broken down, consumed, oxidized, dissolved, scattered, or incorporated elsewhere. The conservation laws of physics are not broken by death. The person's body does not pass out of nature. It remains entirely within nature. In that narrow physical sense, there is no annihilation. What ends is not substance itself, but organized biological use of substance. This distinction is central. A living human being is not just a pile of atoms or a quantity of energy. The person is a dynamic pattern cells arranged in tissues, tissues in organs, organs in regulatory relationship, all coordinated through metabolism and nervous activity. The brain maintains memories, perception, and self-models through active signaling across changing networks. The heart maintains circulation. The lungs maintain gas exchange. Hormones coordinate slow adjustments. Immune cells patrol and respond. This pattern exists only while the system continuously performs work to preserve it. Once that work stops irreversibly, the pattern decays. The atoms remain, but the living order does not. This is why conservation of matter and energy does not imply survival of the self. A book reduced to ash still preserves mass, but not the readable arrangement of the page. A melody requires more than air molecules. It requires ordered vibration across time. In the same way, a person requires more than ingredients. A person requires organization. Information sharpens the point further. In science, information can refer to the arrangement or distinguishable pattern of a system. Some information persists after death. DNA sequences may survive in descendants or tissues for a time. Bone and teeth preserve structural clues. Written records preserve words. Memories in other people preserve impressions. But the detailed informational state of a living brain, including the constantly changing neural activity that supports present consciousness, is not known to persist after irreversible brain death in any recoverable way. The connectome, the full network of neural connections, changes during life and is embedded in active cellular states, chemical balances, and patterns of ongoing use. Once the tissue breaks down, the fine-grained organization that supports a living mind is lost. Science can sometimes reconstruct aspects of a life from traces, but not the complete working person. In this sense, death is not like pressing a button that clears a device and prepares it to run again with the same identity. It is the collapse of a complex one-time organization that cannot be naturally resumed once its structure has been irreversibly destroyed. Biology reinforces this conclusion. The body resets many small processes during life. Sleep helps restore certain neural and hormonal balances. Wound healing rebuilds damaged tissue. Immune responses clear infection and return the body toward equilibrium. Bone remodels after stress. Memory can be reconsolidated. Cells replace components. These are limited resets because they occur within a still living system that maintains identity while correcting local disorder. Death is different in kind. Not only in degree, it is not one repair cycle among others. It is the failure of the entire framework within which repair is possible. The body no longer has a functioning center of coordination. No circulatory flow carries resources where needed. No nervous integration preserves the self. No metabolism sustains gradients and boundaries. Thus, from a biological standpoint, death is not a reset into renewed life of the same organism. It is the endpoint beyond which the organism ceases to be an active unit. Yet to stop there would miss something important. Although the self-maintaining organism ends, the world does not revert to what it was before that life existed. Matter continues. Energy continues in transformed paths. Genetic influence may continue through descendants. Cultural and environmental effects continue. Memory persists for a time in other brains. A grave changes soil chemistry. A cremated body changes mineral distribution in another way. A parent changes a child's nervous system through care or harm. A scientist changes later work through published findings. A builder changes a city skyline. A voter changes a political outcome. A poet changes language in readers not yet born. These are not spiritual continuations established by physics or biology. They are causal continuations. The person no longer exists as an experiencing self, but the world retains consequences of that person's former organization and action. Entropy helps frame why this asymmetry exists. Entropy, in plain terms, refers to the tendency for energy to spread and for highly ordered states to become harder to maintain without work. Living systems resist this locally by taking in energy and exporting disorder into their surroundings. They build and preserve intricate form only because they are open systems drawing constant resources from outside. Death closes that strategy. Without metabolic work, local order relaxes. Structures break down. Molecules diffuse. Temperature equalizes. The body becomes easier to describe in simpler physical terms because it no longer supports the layered complexity of life. In that sense, death is a reset only if reset means release from a highly organized, energy-dependent state into broader physical equilibrium and ecological reuse. It is not a reset if the word implies the restarting of the same personal process. This matters because language often hides a false symmetry. The phrase "another reset" can suggest that death may lead to a new personal beginning, in the same way sleep leads to waking, or winter gives way to spring. Science does not support that analogy for the conscious individual. Sleep preserves the brain. Seasons preserve the planetary system. Death, once irreversible, does not preserve the living human organization required for renewed personal awareness. The continuation that follows is of another kind. It belongs to redistributed matter, transferred energy, altered environments, inherited genes, and surviving traces in other minds. These are real, but they are not the same as the continued existence of the dead person as a functioning biological self. Even so, death is not mere subtraction. The ended individual has modified the path of the world. Each life acts as a temporary organizing center that gathers matter, uses energy, creates relationships, and leaves effects. When that center dissolves, its influences do not all dissolve at once. Some are brief, like warmth fading from skin or sound fading from a room. Some are longer, like nutrients entering soil, memories shaping grief, or a changed habit passed to a child. Some may last for generations or longer in genes, texts, works, institutions, and altered landscapes. The self ends, but the consequences radiate outward with different lifespans. In this regard, death resembles the stopping of a complex pattern whose waves continue moving through surrounding media. So the scientific answer in this region is precise. Death is a reset of bodily status from active organism to passive matter in transformation. It is a reset of ecological role from self-maintaining consumer to nutrient source and trace. It is a reset of physical organization from dynamic regulation to breakdown under ordinary law. But it is not a reset of personal identity into demonstrable new life, and it is not an erasure of all consequences. What continues is not the same pattern that ends. What continues is the material, the causal aftermath, and the traces carried by other systems. This makes death both final and continuous, depending on what is being considered. It is final for the individual biological self as science can presently observe it. It is continuous for matter, energy flow, and consequence. Between those two statements lies the calmest evidence-based meaning of reset. One form closes. The world does not return to zero. It carries the remains, the influences, and the altered conditions forward into later forms that are no longer the same life, yet are still shaped by it. At the deepest inner layer, the question is no longer about galaxies, planets, bodies, or even the fading brain alone. It becomes a question about the limit of scientific speech itself. Science can describe what happens to matter, energy, tissues, organs, neural activity, memory traces, and environmental consequences. It can compare the living brain with the dead brain. It can examine what is lost when circulation stops and what remains in bones, genes, or records. But when all measurable functions that support conscious life have irreversibly ceased, science reaches a boundary. Beyond that boundary, it can say what evidence does and does not show. It cannot fill silence with certainty where observation no longer reaches. In this region, the idea of another reset must be held against that limit. The deepest answer available is not dramatic. It is careful, narrow, and still. What is known with strong support is that human consciousness, as presently understood, depends on the functioning brain, thought, sensation, memory retrieval, emotional integration, self-recognition, language, and deliberate attention all correlate with organized neural activity. Injury to specific brain regions can alter personality, erase memory, disturb perception, remove language, or change the sense of self. Drugs can dim or distort awareness by changing brain chemistry. Sleep changes conscious state through reversible shifts in neural function. Anesthesia suppresses awareness by interfering with the activity of brain networks under controlled conditions. Disease can gradually degrade memory and identity when neural tissue is damaged. These observations support a consistent conclusion. The mind, in lived human form, is not observed to operate independently of the brain. When the brain's integrative activity ends irreversibly, the scientific basis for continued personal consciousness ends with it. This conclusion is sometimes resisted because subjective life feels unlike any other physical process. Pain, color, grief, memory, love, anticipation, and the simple sense of being present do not resemble blood flow or ion exchange from the inside. They are known directly in experience, while the brain is known through instruments, anatomy, and theory. This difference is real. It explains why consciousness remains one of the most difficult subjects in science and philosophy. Researchers can identify correlates of awareness, map networks involved in attention and wakefulness, and study changes in experience produced by injury or stimulation. Yet it remains uncertain exactly how subjective experience arises from physical processes. This is often called the hard problem of consciousness, though the plain point is simpler. Science has strong evidence about dependence and correlation, but not a complete account of why experience feels like anything at all from the inside. That unresolved problem, however, does not amount to evidence that awareness survives death. It marks an explanatory gap within the study of living brains. The distinction matters because uncertainty can be used in two very different ways. It can be treated honestly, as a sign that knowledge is incomplete and further research is needed, or it can be used as an opening for claims that exceed evidence. The first use belongs to science, the second goes beyond it. Observations indicate that when brain function irreversibly ceases, the processes associated with conscious life cease as well. It remains uncertain why subjective experience exists in the form it does, and whether a complete theory of consciousness will fully bridge first-person and third-person accounts. But no accepted evidence shows a conscious self continuing after irreversible brain death in a form that can be detected, measured, or independently verified. The absence of proof is not proof of impossibility in a strict logical sense. It is, however, a clear statement about current evidence. Science does not affirm survival of the self after death. It also does not invent certainty where evidence is absent. This leaves a quiet intellectual space. It is not empty of meaning, but it is empty of confirmed answers beyond the biological end. Human cultures have long filled this space with stories of return, rebirth, judgment, union, dissolution, or transcendence. These belong to religion, philosophy, and personal belief rather than to empirical science, unless they produce testable claims. Science neither validates nor fully discredits every metaphysical idea as a total worldview. It limits itself to what can be observed, inferred, and revised through evidence. In that disciplined modesty, it says something both humble and profound. The individual human being, as a living conscious organism, ends when the brain and body irreversibly cease the functions that sustain that organism. Beyond that point, science can track consequences, remnants, and effects. It cannot confirm an experiencing subject continuing elsewhere without evidence. The inner meaning of reset therefore becomes more exact. Death is not shown to be the start of another personal cycle in the way a seed becomes a plant or a season returns after winter. The body's materials continue, its atoms enter other systems, its effects continue in memory, genes, and world. But the conscious center that gathers these into one lived perspective appears to end. From the standpoint of present evidence, death resets the person out of experience rather than into a new experience that can be scientifically described. The word reset may still apply if it refers to matter returning to wider circulation or to the dissolution of one organized state into broader physical process. It does not apply, on available evidence, as proof of renewed personal awareness. Yet this conclusion is not a statement that life is therefore empty, or that death makes experience meaningless. Science does not support that inference. A finite process can still be real, significant, and full. A sunset is not less visible because it ends. A season is not less alive because it passes. In biology, value is not measured by duration alone. A human life has consequence because it organizes matter, action, memory, care, labor, knowledge, and relation into one temporary but influential pattern. Death closes that pattern, but closure does not cancel what has been lived. The fact that consciousness may not continue after irreversible death, according to current evidence, does not erase the reality of having been conscious at all. It does not erase love given, work done, harm caused, kindness received, or understanding gained. These belong to the life that was, and through consequence they belong partly to the world that remains. At the innermost point, then, the scientific answer is both firm and limited. It is firm in saying that no reliable evidence shows the personal conscious self surviving irreversible death. It is limited in admitting that science does not yet fully explain consciousness even in life, and cannot make declarations about what lies wholly beyond measurable evidence. This combination of firmness and limit is not weakness, it is intellectual discipline. It protects inquiry from false certainty and from easy consolation unsupported by data. It also leaves room for wonder of a quieter sort. Not wonder that pretends to know more than it does, but wonder that a brief conscious life can arise at all from matter, live within a vast universe, reflect on its own ending, and then return its substance to the world. In this deepest region, stillness is the final scientific image, not punishment, not spectacle, not demonstrated rebirth. The brain's activity ceases, the body enters other processes, the traces of a life continue for a time in matter, memory, and consequence. What remains uncertain stays uncertain. What is known remains enough to describe death as the end of the individual biological self, and the continuation of everything that self has borrowed from and impressed upon the wider world. So the beginning of another reset, in the language of evidence, is not the awakening of the same person elsewhere. It is the release of one life's materials and effects into larger continuities that were always present. The self goes quiet. The universe does not. Earth does not. Memory does not. At least not immediately. Matter does not. Consequence does not. The deepest answer science offers is therefore calm. Death is an ending of personal experience as far as evidence can show, and a continuation of material and causal existence in forms that no longer gather themselves into the same living mind. Night returns everything to a quieter scale. The largest galaxies continue their slow motion. The sun continues to shine for now. Earth continues to turn through air and cloud. Oceans continue to move against the shore. Soil continues its patient exchange of root, mineral, water, and decay. Nothing in nature stands outside this long circulation. Life rises within it for a time, gathers itself into bodies, thoughts, memories, and bonds, and then releases its hold. A human life, in scientific view, is brief but not separate from the wider order. It is made from ancient matter, sustained by a living planet, shaped by inheritance and experience, and carried for a while by the living activity of the brain and body. Death ends that activity when it can no longer be restored. The conscious self grows quiet. The body returns by degrees to chemistry, ecology, and earth. What remains moves outward into other forms. Some of it becomes memory in other minds. Some of it becomes consequence in other lives. Some of it becomes part of air, soil, water, and future living things. No evidence shows a full personal awakening beyond irreversible death. What evidence does show is continuity without sameness. Matter remains in motion. Effects remain in the world. A life does not stay intact, yet it does not vanish without trace. It becomes part of larger processes that were already moving long before birth and will continue long after any single ending. In that calm perspective, death is neither a clean beginning nor a simple nothing. It is the closing of one living pattern within a universe that keeps transforming. The borrowed elements go back. The influences continue for a while. The silence that follows belongs not outside nature, but within it, as one more still passage in a world that never fully stops changing.